7 years ago now, the peak of Marvel was taken from us, ripped right from our homes. Disney Plus rose, and that ensured that for at least a good while, we weren't going to be returning to Hell's Kitchen or any of the characters that we loved. This show is one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen. For those who don't know, the original concept for this was to be a complete reboot, bringing back Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio, but ignoring the Netflix series. They'd recast Vanessa, Foggy died off screen, Karen didn't exist, and it was some kind of courtroom procedural. They'd filmed a few episodes, they'd filmed a decent bit, and then the writer's strike happened. Whilst they had that spare time on their hands, Kevin Feige took a little look at what they'd filmed, and that mixed with some of the actors voicing their concerns, they realised that they were in desperate need of a complete creative overhaul. So, Dario Scarpane was brought in to write 3 new episodes with directors Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead to re-edit, reshoot, as well as doing those 3 entirely new episodes that are just them. What an insane task to put together this Frankenstein's monster thing. When it is good, it is good, and it's kind of impossible to talk about this show without talking about some of the behind the scenes as we go, and I'm going to try and keep it to a minimum because I do want to do another video where I go fully in depth on that. Although that said, something's still not right here. Oh, there it is, come on. More smoke. No, more smoke. No, more smoke, and turn down the contrast as well. Anyway, this is going to be a big one. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, the court is in session.
Well, I'll admit it's not entirely unpleasant to see you again.
Episode 1 wonderfully brings us back into Hell's Kitchen, with a very different visual style, but still one of its own that's effective in its own right. I've already spoken about a large part of this episode in a previous video at length, so I won't be as in-depth here just to save a bit of time, but the visuals bring us down to the city level, and I really like this as an opening because it retains how important the city is for the characters that we're watching here. This opening really feels like a welcome back, you know, we've spent a bit away from this specific area of the MCU, and we're literally being brought right back down to it, and the music reflects that as well. The Newton brothers do a great job throughout this whole show. I do think the music isn't always used the best. There are scenes that would be better to just allow us to hear the characters, or even just sit in silence, but the music is constantly kind of playing, and I think that's a big downside to this show at times. But anyway, as much as I don't mind the initial visual style that this show takes, every scene looks like they've hotboxed it, even when there's no smoke, and I don't understand where the colour has gone. It's more noticeable because of how beautiful the original was as well, and we lost a lot because of this. The grittiness is gone, the use of colour is insanely toned down. A big part of it is the different cameras they're using, much more digital, but at the same time you can still make those look good. It's infuriating that there are dark scenes set at night where you literally can't see anything. And anytime they try to use colour to mean something, doesn't always have the right effect because the grading and lighting is so flat. The camera movement overall is a bit over the place. Some action scenes are pretty great, but others are cut to shit. This first episode with the bullseye fight is generally pretty brilliant. The dread that builds as they lead to Foggy's death was really well done, and I like how it rips away the excitement of returning to this part of the world. One of the best things this show does is push Matt over the edge, because he pushes Dex over the edge. He tries to kill him. With the foundation of season 3, this kind of has extra impact, and I think sets up one of the best rivalries that exists in the comics between Daredevil and Bullseye. Matt's arc deals with the fact that he made that decision. Even though Dex survived, Matt fully was aware that that should kill him and went through with it anyway. He didn't care, he made the choice in that moment. On the whole, I think a lot of what works here is also due to the help of the Netflix show and how well established the likes of Matt, Fisk, and Vanessa are. But this first episode is an effective way to do such a time jump and separate the eras, and if I'm honest, I kind of love Matt's descent as Daredevil comes back over the show. The tone is all over the place, and how he can act episode to episode can be very jarring, as well as just the tone of the show overall. But Matt's arc, I think, is mostly well done, despite the fact we've seen it before, and yeah, it was better before. Overall, by the end of the show, Matt and the Fisk's characters work incredibly well still. Cherry is maybe the most pointless and insufferable character that Marvel has ever come up with. Your Honor, I believe he should be executed in episode 1 of season 2. He is constantly trying to ensure that Matt doesn't lean back to his Daredevil tendencies, and goes mental and on rants and insults Matt when he thinks that might be about to happen. Going on, oh, I don't want you to blow up your life and stuff like that, but the thing is, right, he finds out that Matt is Daredevil on that rooftop on that fateful night, but we have no context for their relationship before that, and then everything that happens after that is built off screen. So why would I care? How could I possibly care? We don't know why Cherry feels so strongly this way. We don't know why Cherry and Matt have this relationship. I don't know anything about Cherry as an individual, and I don't know about his relationship with Matthew, so I just don't care. Cherry almost represents everything wrong with this show, and in no disrespect to the actor, but I hate Cherry. I hate him. If they wanted a character like this, you had Mahoney. Mahoney could have done this. He was friends with Foggy and Matt. It would be interesting to see how he feels after Foggy's death. And they've got enough of a relationship that could have been a cool progression for him. That he could have become Matt's private investigator, because we know they know each other. If he found out that Matt was Daredevil, that could create something interesting. I could have sworn they said he was coming back, and that simple character swap is one of the many baffling choices that this show makes. Heather is the main love interest for Matt, and in the back half of the season she does challenge Matt quite a bit, and their relationship becomes strained. Her being Fisk's therapist is a cool idea, but I don't think they entirely make use of that tense dynamic. Just, you know, the camera's on. In episode 8, that comes into play, where Matt realises that Heather has been the Fisk's therapist throughout the rest of the season, and I thought they were kind of going to build on that in the final 2 episodes, but they don't really. I think we miss key things that make Heather a character individually. She feels only written for Matt's plot, and God, their relationship is not developed well at all. I'm sorry, but I don't care. And this is one of the biggest kind of differences between this show and the last one, in how the likes of Karen, Foggy, Frank, even much more minor characters like Mahoney, all felt like characters. They didn't feel like they were in the show to serve Matt Murdock or Daredevil. They were entirely their own characters in their own right. I think season 3's episode Karen is one of the best episodes of television we've ever gotten. Whereas in this show, they inherently misunderstand that. They think that Matt and Fisk are the only people we care about. But that's just objectively not true, and lessens the care we've got for the world. The stakes are lower, because we just don't really care about these characters. They're only there if they're needed for something going on with Matt. They don't really seem to have their own thoughts and well, character. Matt's boss Kirsten is essentially absent until a key moment again for Matt in episode 8. She confronts Matt about being away from work and not being as involved, and he has a bit of a crash out in that episode. But rather than judging or pressing, she's actually utterly understanding, and whilst that sole incident works, the first time that I am at all interested in this character being in episode 8, one episode before the finale, is crazy. Dex and Karen get written out of the show in understandable but frustratingly forced ways. It's a very obviously a setup episode to kind of bridge the gaps of eras. The cafe scene with Matt and Fisk in episode 1 is genuinely great. The writing and acting is brilliant. Matt insists he's not Daredevil anymore, as Fisk insists he's not the Kingpin anymore. Matt feels totally unworthy of being anywhere near the H word. Hero, with Fisk assuring Matt his criminal life is left behind because he wants to be here for Vanessa and make change for the city properly. But as they face off against each other at the end of the episode, it's clear both of them still have a second half within that they're trying desperately to suppress. Despite the shitty use of colour grading, the concept of how the lighting is being used here, with the red overshadowing Matt and the blue and whites over Kingpin, is conceptually effective. It would work better if it didn't look like shit. Episode 2 and 3 follow the attempted prosecution of Hector Ayala / the White Tiger, while starting to include dirty cops that happen to be repping a Punisher logo tattoo, which I find quite a cool addition because Matt can't see that, so it takes him a bit longer to kind of catch up here. There aren't many heroes like Daredevil to help around the city anymore. Plenty for major world-threatening events, but somewhere like Hell's Kitchen just seems to be kind of left and not important enough when it comes to a threat like Thanos or Ultron. So episode 2 sees Matt chasing down the witness to the killing of the corrupt cop, who is also being hunted by said corrupt cops. It's kind of just a huge step down for me. It's paced really weirdly, and it's just super slow. Feels like it's dragging its heels until suddenly a very brutal action scene at the end that is also kind of cut to shit. And there's some really cool moments in that fight, and I like that it's Matt relapsing on his violence, but there seems to be no actual mental effect of that. He hits that primal scream at the end after brutalizing these 3 dudes. But then episode 3 is just a pure courtroom drama with no dwelling on that action and no mention at all. You truly care about Hector and the outcome of this trial. There is a huge emphasis on Matt's inner conflicts about not being a vigilante anymore. He sees himself very much in Hector. There are conversations that almost feel like Hector is talking to Daredevil instead of Matt. It feels like a pylon of signs pushing Matt back towards that lifestyle, but it feels weird based off the ending of the last episode and ends up with an overall kind of confusing intention. There's some brief moments in these episodes that I like though. I mean, I do generally like episode 3 as a courtroom drama. I think the moment where we see Matt lurking outside a church, unable to let himself in, he's listening to the prayers because he doesn't feel like he has the right to be in there anymore. Some really small but phenomenal stuff, actually. Now I want to talk about Daniel Blake pretty quickly, played by Michael Gandolfini, probably the best new character. It becomes clear Fisk is going to use this guy's absolute devotion to his benefit, but it's great seeing that develop, even though it kind of does take a backseat. I hope we get more of him, and I hope he's more developed, because I think he has a lot of potential, and I think he is good. But the further we go along, the more Fisk essentially raises Blake, and the performance is a great mix of comedic and genuine. This show actually brings a lot of comedy to Wilson Fisk overall, whilst keeping him threatening and villainous. This is a great example of bringing a serious character into more comedic scenes. So Fisk is pushing an anti-vigilante agenda, convenient whilst Matt defends the White Tiger in court. I like how the wider MCU comes into play in this show.
Could it have been a scroll?
Nope.
Spider-Man gets referenced decently, of course. Characters cross over from Hawkeye and talking about mystical artifacts with the White Tiger. The mystical stuff in the Netflix saga was handled very differently. I do like how they kind of normalize it more in this show. They're often quite funny inclusions, telling a more grounded story and just acknowledging some of the bizarre stuff that goes around them in the wider MCU. When Hector wins the trial, I was genuinely quite happy. I cared about the character. You learn a lot about him and his mentality, but we also care because it affects Matt. His faith in the legal system is assured in this moment, so therefore at the end of the episode, it is a real shocking moment. The White Tiger is shot in cold blood by some unknown man repping a Punisher logo on his vest.
Judge, jury, executioner!
Hector's daughter can put 2 and 2 together to see the corrupt system and how that failed her father just trying to do good, and that it was likely one of those corrupt cops that killed him after the fact. Matt continues to try and believe in the justice system, and this kind of all leads to him doing a bit of investigating himself, and I have to say I think this show has the best kind of display of Matt's radar. It's very immersive and forces you to lock in. It's insanely effective. The ones in episode 1 and 8 where they use 3 different cameras to achieve the effect are genuinely an inspired way to showcase this. Matt continues to be shown the failures of the legal system, with injustice given to this one guy though, and I weirdly feel more chemistry between Matt and this woman, rather than him and Heather.
Can I say the guy has strong preferences?
Yeah, well, so do I.
There's a prisoner that he's defending at the moment. It's an interesting inclusion because it's trying to make conversation about how the system is willing to spend much more money to punish someone than to helping them live on a day-to-day basis, and how there are different rules for cops as opposed to civilians. But the dude is like kind of ableist to Matt, and it's just a weird dynamic tonally in trying to show some good themes, but there's no reason for him to be so rude to Matt. The idea of Matt having to deal with ableism is an interesting one and should be explored, but it's strange here to me. He finally finds a bullet casing with the Punisher logo engraved on it, so that leads him to the one and only Frank Castle. John Bernthal is so good in this role, and I love him being used to fight against the corruption and moral misunderstanding of his logo that has a lot of real-world resemblance. We rerun a similar moral dilemma of Frank's methods versus Matt's, especially now that Matt is completely on the side of the law, leaving vigilantism behind him. It seems that Frank disapproves of that decision massively. These two act their asses off in this scene, and it is one of my favourite scenes in this show. Frank pushes Matt's buttons just hard enough for him to lash out, Frank embracing it as he can see right through Matt's anger and guilt. No matter what happens to Bullseye, despite the fact he got a life sentence, nothing they can do helps the fact that Foggy is dead. Frank presses him to say Foggy's name. It's only after he says it himself that Matt can bring himself, and when Frank returns asking if old Foggy got life.
You feel good about that?
He got life!
How about old Foggy? He got life.
Foggy.
That makes way for the ending of the episode, showing Matt and Fisk as two sides of the same coin, which is truly the core of this series. Matt reopens the room holding his equipment, multiple Daredevil masks, and he's playing with the billy clubs, whilst Fisk walks past the Rabbit in a Snowstorm painting where he has Adam, Vanessa's side bitch. Ending the episode though, with a look at Muse. We saw him in the opening carrying a body through the subway. The costume design for him is incredible, as well as the location and shot composition, even if it doesn't look visually great with the lighting and color grading. I've said it over and over, the composition at times is pretty good, and I think how they set up Muse as this real, almost horror villain is really appealing and interesting. We've seen his graffiti kind of in passing throughout the previous episodes, so this leads us into the next chapter of the show.
There's a serial killer out there.
How many victims?
Upwards of 60, so they say. He paints with his victims' blood.
Muse is one of the most interesting characters in Marvel Comics, despite very few appearances. Just by design, looks incredible, looks eerie, looks scary. A serial killer who paints graffiti around the city with the blood and organs of his victims. He's kind of Daredevil's Joker in a way. He doesn't have a specific motivation. The only thing we ever get is that he's an artist and just cares about the art, and that's the be-all and end-all of everything. And that's a scary motivation for a villain. This show absolutely butchers this character. Don't think they go nearly as far with the gore with a character like that they could and should have. Muse in the comics is only fulfilled by doing art, and it's interesting. And one of the most interesting things about his character is that he only kills people who want to die. So that is a real interesting moral complication for Daredevil to deal with. But not only that, also the fact that he has superpowers that directly oppose Matt's. In the comics, Muse is an Inhuman. I was expecting him to be revealed to be a mutant in this show, but he's nothing. And I mean that in every sense of the word. But his ability is basically to be a void of the senses. So Matt can't hear his heartbeat. None of that. He's just blank, which is why in the comics Matt can only sense where Muse is if he's holding an item. And that's such an interesting and integral part of the character in the comics that everyone assumed it was a given that that would be in the show. And it's not. It's an insane squandered opportunity. You've got a great actor, the design is incredible, and the setup for him is pretty good. He's marketed as the second main antagonist behind Fisk. Like, he was in all of the trailers, he was in so many posters. We got heavy emphasis on his graffiti, but he's done after 2 episodes. Like, technically, he's throughout the show because we see him in episode 2. It doesn't nearly do justice or live up to the comic counterpart, and is a disappointment for what this show could have done. I am hopeful that they'll bring him back, because I can't believe what they did. Oh wait, there's actually another episode here that I've missed. The show just stops for a little fun bank heist. The bank heist episode featuring Kamala's dad is actually kind of fun. I actually don't hate it. It's weird, and I like one-off episodes in shows generally speaking, but this show felt quite serialized, and so to suddenly do that was a choice. And I think the biggest issue is how tonally at odds it feels. It's the episode after that Matt becomes Daredevil again. But the bank heist is a fun kind of romp, and with the episode before being when Matt reunites with Frank and he's confronted about Foggy's death again, and kind of he's getting pushed further down that Daredevil side, and then yeah, we've got a 40 minutes of just a fun bank heist with Matt trying to take them down from the inside, and that's a lot of fun. Charlie Cox is great, and then we get a brutal action scene at the end where Matt folds a dude's leg in half with his full body weight. Like, what are we doing here? All of the action that was filmed before Overhaul is from fine to bad. You know, this episode has no effect, and it's jarring as hell, but as an episode of TV, it's fine. Following that though, I do have to admit that episode 6 is pretty damn good. I love that Muse's art had been painted around the city in the background we were seeing the art and just never really knew the relevance of it until now. So it's a shame that he gets this episode and next, and then he's dead. He never lives up to the threat that the series set him up to be. The young Ayala girl is taken by Muse, so when her mother calls Matt, he is finally pushed over the edge, putting on the costume, and it does feel earned. Even though this could have happened much earlier, it does feel earned. And I like that this is what brings Daredevil out, because, you know, it's when he started going out originally. If you remember to Nelson v. Murdoch in Season 1, oh fuck, he went out because he could hear a child being abused. And here, he's returned to his Daredevil ways to help another child in need. I like that a lot. We desperately needed a suit-up scene, but whatever, I guess. When Daredevil finds Muse in the subway tunnels, we get an admittedly cool conceptual visual of seeing the train lights going into the background and fading with Daredevil running at Muse, but it's ruined by just shoddy VFX and CGI again. Like, it's such a hard balance with something like this, because on one hand, I'd rather have it than not have it. Can we, like, do it better? The actual fight is great, though. Genuinely brilliant, which makes sense because it's the same stunt team as before. It's intercut exceptionally with Fisk's fight with Adam as well. Both actors are at the top of their game here, ending with Daredevil finally saving the Ayala daughter, with Muse escaping, and Fisk dragging Adam back to his cage after beating him near to death. So with how this episode ends, prime position for the last few episodes to focus on Muse as the villain and building Fisk up. We don't get that. Episode 7 kind of squanders everything that episode 6 did. Fisk finds out that Daredevil's back, and that gives him his first kind of ample opportunity to bring the AVT, Anti-Vigilante Task Force, into action. I really like Heather questioning Matt on his distant behaviour, and this is why Heather is kind of the best of a bad bunch for me with the new additions. Because, like, Heather's right here, you know, like, Matt is being a dick to her, as he also treated Karen like shit in Season 2, and everyone like shit in Season 3, you know, like, Heather is right, but she just doesn't really stand on her own as much of a character, so I don't really care. I think this is the most blatant moment where it feels like the new creative team is talking to the old creative team, where Matt is saying how he feels that this new life isn't normal. It's nothing like his old life with Foggy and Karen and Nelson and Murdoch, because that's exactly what it feels like for us as well. We finally see Heather in a therapy session with Bastion, who the last time we actually saw on screen, like properly, was in episode 2, asking for help. And as most people knew, that was Muse. I'm not sure if this was meant to be a big twist reveal in this episode, but it doesn't hit in any way, shape or form. This is the first we've properly seen Muse outside of his mask, and this is also the first therapy session we've seen. We really should have seen their therapy sessions in each episode, even if it was just one scene, little moments to see potentially him getting more unhinged and just slowly dropping more hints as we went through, but we never see them start. We just cut to the end, where he reveals his intent to have Heather be his final big art piece. And it's a shame that there's no real build up to this, because, I mean, the scene itself is relatively well executed, the way he has it tied up and stuff like that. Matt figures out that Heather is Muse's target from a painting having the same facial structure as her face. Yeah, I don't like that. That's fucking stupid. That doesn't make any sense. When Daredevil does show up, though, we get probably the worst action scene of the show. There is just too many cuts that could potentially battle Taken 3 at times, and just is overall strangely shot. And I mean, I loved the moment where he grapples through Muse's chest. That was fucking peak. But it feels like quite a rushed action scene, and nothing really works for me in it. And then Muse just dies.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
And that leaves us in an interesting position, having Heather take her life. We never capitalise on that, though, in the next few episodes. Now, the Muse arc is over. That was it. Just these 2 episodes. What a letdown. Even this brilliant shot of Muse dead on the canvas can't save the absolute butchering that this episode did to the character. There is an immediate shift here because we have the new creative team. This is all new material, all new script and footage, and the slow zoom out of the blue rose as more colours come into frame, ending in Dex's cell, the slow pan backwards. I love how they use the blue to show Dex locking in, essentially. And already, there is more source in the first 5 seconds of this episode than there has been for most of the rest of the show. Now, it still doesn't look great, I'll be honest with you. I don't think the colour grading is much better here, or the lighting. It still looks quite flat and grey, or even muddy at times. I think that apartment fight scene in the next episode is lit kind of dreadfully, but there's some bolder attempts, I suppose, which is better than what we've been getting. Fisk and Vanessa have found themselves back on the same page, and I've enjoyed their arc of finding a balance of power with their new positions, culminating in her shooting Adam herself. It soon becomes apparent that Heather sees all vigilantes the same way as Fisk, and this is where the narrative of her being Fisk's therapist finally comes to the forefront a little bit when they're invited to Fisk's gala. We follow Matt going into the office, and that's when he crashes out immediately.
Bullshit.
This is the scene that gave more character to Kirsten than the entire rest of the show. This episode is really the kind of epicenter of Matt's new life collapsing. Heather is on the completely opposite side to him at the moment. His job is killing him. He doesn't feel like he's making a difference in any capacity. I love Matt's monologue because you really feel like he's drained after trying so hard to do things through the system, and it's just failed time and time again.
We're not serving justice here, we're babysitting chaos.
This is also where he finds out that Dex has been moved to general population and has requested to talk to Matt himself. And it's at Josie's where he realizes that it was likely a hit on Foggy rather than just a random shooting, and I love that this happens on his return to Josie's bar, because what brings this realization is the friendship with Foggy. He realized that Foggy that night had opened a bottle that they only open when celebrating something, leading him to realize that someone hired Dex to silence him because Foggy was about to win a big case. Their confrontation is great. The man who killed his best friend, and in essence his world, is now begging for help, and Matt tries to get answers about Foggy's death, but he's not giving in, and so lashes out, smashing Dex's head on the table out of just pure frustration. I love the raw emotion and anger and disgust that comes out of Matt when he's face to face with Dex here.
Fuck you.
This of course leads to Dex killing a guard with his own tooth, which is incredible, but I also want to know, when did he figure out he could do that? How long had he been practicing using his mouth for such force? Wilson Bethel is a perfect bullseye, bringing emotion and threat. It's a travesty that he wasn't initially in this show. I hope he's more involved in season 2, and from behind the scenes stuff it seemingly appears that he will be. I mean, their rivalry in season 3 was incredible. They were such an incredible match, and Charlie Cox and Bethel going back and forth was brilliant, and he's obviously grown into much more of a villainous role after the fact in season 3. His physicality in the performance is top notch, and I just hope we get more. All of these moving parts are now heading straight to Fisk's gala, which is an exciting kind of endgame here. Even Swordsman, who's here, by the way, I guess, the guy from Hawkeye, immediately Matt beelines for the Fisks, and Wilson's reaction to Matt stepping in to take Vanessa for a dance is fucking hilarious. We get our first real character development for BB Urick as well, which is another case of it taking way too long to care about a character. She is someone that I was immediately so interested in because of her connection to Ben in season 1. There is so much potential there, and again it kind of feels that is set up for next year. So Matt is confronting Vanessa about Foggy's death, realizing that she clearly had some big role in it, but then we get that insane dolly zoom effect into the side of Matt's head, and then panning and zooming up to the top of a balcony where you can see Bullseye set aim, the gun clicks, and Matt jumps in front of the bullet as Dex tries to execute Fisk. This leaves Dex in shock and confusion, and I think it's still up in the air if he knows that Matt is Daredevil. It never really felt too clear to me. But the episode ends with red lights opposing Dex's blues and Fisk's white, while Matt is left to bleed out on the floor. Following this up directly in the finale, there's great symbolism here with Wilson and Vanessa's clothing, her wearing a fully red dress, showing the woman she's become since we last saw her, whereas Wilson's blood splatter symbolizing that he is very much Mayor Kingpin now. We see when Vanessa actually hires Dex. Clearly Dex is incredibly unwell, and similarly to Wilson, she takes advantage of him for her own game to take out Foggy, making him believe that this is his purpose, confirming Matt's suspicions. And I like that this season hasn't lost the emotional side of Dex. Whilst he is an antagonist pretty through and through, he's an incredibly complex character that leaves you with mixed feelings towards him. Unfortunately, he's not ready in the finale, and I suppose my one kind of cope coming out of his role in this show is that if they couldn't do him with the nuance that he should be dealt with, then yeah, I'd rather him be in a bit more of a minor role until they have the facilities to truly utilize the character and the depth he has. Matt wakes in the hospital, and him saying Karen instead of Heather was a fucking brutal moment.
Karen?
I kind of loved it, but that seemed to be the last straw for her, which is interesting because now the showrunner seems to have confirmed that Heather is one of Matt's exes. That wasn't really clear in the episode, if I'm honest, but the thing is, she's right. She's been put through emotional hell by Matt. When he took the bullet for Fisk at the gala, I think it was almost in a way for him to reclaim his soul, opposing what Dex said earlier about good people saving their worst enemies, as well as Matt taking the action he wishes he did in episode 1, instead of hunting down Dex to pummel him. If he could do it again, maybe he would have just taken the bullet. Even Matt seems unsure of the deep reason he did this, but he just knew in his heart that that was right in the moment and did it. But Fisk sees an opportunity to take out Matt, so sends Buck to finish the job, and then they trigger a citywide blackout, which leads to the terror of this night. Frank lurks in Matt's apartment, dying for a coffee, and I love these two.
Is that a new costume? What do they call you now? Nightgown man.
It's revealed later that Karen is the one who called Frank to go and help Matt. Despite their opposing morals, they do have this inherent understanding. It leads to engaging exchanges that are comedic and dramatic, and I quite like how Frank makes it very clear that he's doing things his way, and Matt doesn't really have an option considering his condition, having been shot in the chest the last episode. But Frank kind of steals this episode, if I'm honest. The way that he immediately comes in with a shotgun, obliterating dudes, and when got the guy on the desk and he's shooting over and over again, he's back on his bullshit, and I'm so here for it. There is a hilarious bit of ADR of Matt yelling no stop, and that really took me out of the sequence. We return to a very old issue here in this show. It's way too dark. It's way too fucking dark. Similarly to the fog in episode 1, it's seemingly there to hide the effects, except there's not even any smoke here. So I don't know what's happened, and the wild thing is, a lot of the previous stunt work looks better for a lot of the sequences in this show, and that's truly upsetting, because the sequence is kind of good in terms of action, but you can barely see it. I love the grenade explosion and how we have to wait to see the full explosion until we're back at ground level after they've jumped. Really hits that feeling of damage and impending doom that they've gone after Matt Murdock's apartment, not just Daredevil. It's an effective climax to the opening of this episode, transitioning us into Karen's return.
Yeah, baby! That's what I've been waiting for!
Such an amazing character, maybe my favourite Marvel character of all time, at least in live action. It's a genuine insult that she's in so little of this season. I love seeing the three together, don't get me wrong, but in a similar way to Dex, if you don't think you can give such a tragic and deep character the treatment that she deserves, you should work harder to do that. But as I say, these three spend a bit of time together, a very complicated triangle. I think Frank loves Karen, but wholeheartedly believes that Matt is a better person for her, and obviously Matt and Karen have a romantic past, having moved forward in different ways, but seemingly still retain some feelings and attraction, which I kind of assume that Matt and Karen are going to get a bit of a romantic push in season 2, and I love them together. I really like them. Cox and Wall have brilliant chemistry, and I really like this relationship. This episode can be a bit fanservice-y, for sure. The avocados at law stuff, I think mostly works. This finale almost acts to show us what hasn't worked this season, and tried to re-show what was special to us. Turns out that Foggy hadn't filed the final piece of evidence, revealing that Red Hook was unowned land, meaning Vanessa could launder her money through there legally. And now that Fisk wants to build his new empire there as mayor, they'd have total free reign. Now, as mentioned, Frank gets a lot to do in this episode. Due to the task force starting to wear his own logo, we get a great action scene with him taking on a whole bunch of the task force until they tie him up. I love this confrontation. Officer Pole claiming they all admire Frank and what he does, clearly misunderstanding Frank's true motivation and beliefs. A great correlation to the real world events where it had become associated with extremists, despite it being a symbol of justice for Frank, and I like how they're mirroring the real world usage of the symbol. Matt and Karen make way to Red Hook, but it is crawling with Task Force, so with him being injured, Karen helps him realise that he will simply die down there, or potentially even kill again, compromising himself as he previously did. The episode ends with Fisk making a speech to the city, manipulating the events, using Bullseye's attempt on his life and the chaos around it to turn the events into an excuse for the Task Force activity. despite the fact he caused all of it in the first place. He puts the city into martial law with an 8 PM curfew, and now this is a moment whereby bringing Daredevil further into the MCU, these events have to be expected to have an effect elsewhere. Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Moon Knight, the Thunderbolt, Hawkeye, this is too big of a change in status for such a prominent city and location within a cinematic universe for this to be ignored by other projects. Fisk basically wins here, and that should have pretty big ripples. Fisk crushing that guy's head to keep control of the police is an incredibly brutal moment, maybe the goriest of the show. Truly great stuff, the practical effects are phenomenal. It's a great moment hitting home that the Kingpin is back, but it does feel a bit over the top and a bit forced for shock value, and we'll kind of circle back to this shortly. I love Matt and Karen's conversation at Josie's, reflecting on Matt's arc through the series. It's on the nose with what the intent is here, but it works. This season saw Matt forcing himself into this life that isn't true to him, as well as finding faith in himself that when the system fails, Daredevil can still help. Despite his faults, that doesn't have to destroy him as a person, hence why everyone around him who see his darkness stick by him. That's why Foggy did, that's why Karen does. Although him saying he needs an army and then seeing all these characters that I actively dislike was kind of hilarious and genuinely angering, where the fuck are the Defenders? Or frankly, anyone else?
And I've got to say, in all honesty, it's the biggest piece of dog shit.
If I made such a good speech about needing an army to take on this big mob boss, and then I walk in, and instead of the Defenders, I see Cherry the retired cop, I'd probably wave the white flag or just kill myself. Matt ends the episode and the season with a speech on the state of the city. Fisk rules, and the only way to go forward is boldly standing on your own 2 feet, not allowing yourself to be swallowed by the corrupt system. It is an effective end to the season to leave our characters in a very interesting place.
Never forget, I love New York.
Born Again is a real mess, and I don't think there's any way around it. The tale of a tragedy and the effects that it has, the tragedy in-world being Foggy's death, but also, in terms of behind the scenes, the tragedy of losing everything related to the original run. The show doesn't know what it is. It just objectively doesn't. Episodes 1, 8 and 9 are levels above the rest, starting off on a strong note before taking a bit of a nosedive into some interesting plots and ideas, but ultimately stuff that I didn't care about. They legitimately gave us a whole new cast and formed all these relationships off screen and expected us to care about them, except for Heather, who just is rushed in her relationship with Matt. So even then, I can't find myself caring. All season Matt is being handed reasons why he should be Daredevil, but fights it every time. And the moment it eventually does happen, it does work in episode 6. But they drag it out way too much. Having him break his streak of no violence in episode 2, and then episode 3 not even talking about that. 4, Frank confronts him with these themes. Then the bank heist is a fun little adventure with no consequence that ends in Matt folding a dude's leg with his entire body weight, to then back focusing on Matt feeling the overbearing weight of Foggy's death. And then when Muse shows up, that's what finally pushes Matt over the edge, but that feels like it could have happened in episode 2, or 3, or 4, and then they go and butcher the character of Muse, and then episode 8 and 9 are kinda good again, because they have barely anything to do with anything else that we've seen. And I feel a lot of these same issues with Fisk. I felt there was multiple separate occasions where I thought, okay, Kingpin's back. Fisk is back. We don't need to hear that over and over again. And that's why that head crush at the end, as much as I love a scene like that, it did kind of feel unnecessary. I mean, even the creatives have said it's meant to represent Kingpin's grand return, but I thought we got that when we saw him holding Adam captive. If not that, when he brutalized Adam. If not that, when Vanessa killed him. What do you mean? The original show's side characters felt like their own people, even outside of Matt. Everyone was an individual character and felt like they had their own lives, whereas in this show, it honestly feels like they cease to exist when they're not on camera, and I don't care about them when they do. This is a literal Frankenstein's monster of a season, but I can't help but kind of like it. It doesn't reach anywhere near the mark of the original show. In any capacity, not even episodes 1 or 8 or 9. Nowhere near. There's no conversation to be had there. Anyone who preferred this over season 2 of Daredevil, I think, is probably out of their mind. But it's a genuine miracle that this show works in any way. And I know you can argue that it doesn't, but some of it does. Considering the best stuff in this season came from the new creative team, I have faith that Season 2 will improve on a lot of this one's downfalls. I don't know whether this was the intention, but I kind of feel like it was, in how we spend so much time in this new life that I think even the new creative team must have seen it and thought, we don't care, the fans aren't going to care, and that feels like they addressed that in episode 8 and 9, in how Matt is directly saying, this life isn't his, this is weird, this is strange, what are they doing here? And then they bring in Frank and Karen, Dex, and we're kind of back to the Daredevil we know. Literally ending with Radiohead's Everything in Its Right Place is a brilliant needle drop. I really liked it. But it is very on the nose in how, okay guys, we fixed it. We're back to where we were before the other guys fucked it up. And I kind of respect that in a way. But there's also a part of me that can't help but think, what was that original vision? Would it have been better? Because it would have been more coherent, but also it sounded kind of dreadful, and I didn't like what we got from it in here. So it's impossible to know, but we've got it now.